Hi everyone, I'm very pleased to be here with you today. First, I would like to thank Mars Verlag for the opportunity to be here for this second edition of the Educator Spiel Day. We were there in 2019 for the first edition, and maybe people, you guys will be there as well. And you heard the fact that Asmodee Research was at the beginning, and we made some promises about to develop the research about board games, and I'm very pleased today to give you a commitment and a follow-up about the engagement we took a couple of years ago. So, yeah, I'm Micha, I'm the head of Asmodee Research. Just to have my contact and a couple of information if you are interested. But to give you the context, maybe you know Asmodee as a company. We are a leader of the industry. And as a leader, we have responsibilities, we have duties to take care of our ecosystem. So this is why we have designed Asmodee Research to be our driving force for our CSR strategy, to get involved in a couple of directions, to tackle different sustainable goals into education, into healthcare, into well-being, to provide the benefit of board games. And today, Asmodee Research has been developing well. A couple of years ago, I've presented you Gaming Lab, and today I'm very pleased to have Leah, Liam, and Gray to present some research from Gaming Lab. We have also developed a new studio named Access Plus, and I will be able to present you today what is Access Plus. Maybe next year I will be able to present our initiative into education. It's a very work in progress, but it's coming, and we are involved into a chair with the University of Paris to develop the link between creativity and games. So Asmodee Research is everything of that, and for today we have a cool agenda. First, we will have Leah from the team, a PhD student who is working on cognitive and development and in link with board games. Then Liam and Gray about board game and autism. And I will finish this morning session about Access Plus. So thank you. And we will make a full Q&A at the end of the three presentation, just to be good on timing. So Leah, it's yours.
Hello, everyone. Okay, it's working. So I'm Leah Martinez. I'm glad to be here today to present you a part of my PhD work on board games, cognition, and learning, just as Micha told you. So yeah, it's working. So this is me. I'm a PhD student. I work on the impact of board games on the development of cognitive functions. My PhD project is funded by Gaming Lab. So Gaming Lab is a program of Asmodee Research that supports a research project on board games. And so this means that I work in the Research Center on Cognition and Learning at the University of Poitiers in France, and I'm also a part of the Asmodee Research team. So my PhD project is a 3-year project. It started by the end of 2020 and will end by the end of 2023. Oops, I'm sorry with the mic sometimes. Sorry. So it will end by the end of 2023, and so I already have, I hope, some interesting data to present you today. So first of all, I always like to give the starting point of my PhD project. And so let's start with those famous cognitive functions. What are those? So as you may know, cognitive functions are mental abilities that allow us to interact with our environment. It allows us to perceive what is around us, not only to see or to hear or to feel what is around us, but also to interpret this information. It allows us to focus, to think, to get new knowledge, new learnings, and also to communicate with the others. Something that we already know is that playful activities have a positive impact on cognitive functions. When you play an instrument, when you exercise, it helps to enhance your cognitive functions. We also know that particularly playing video games and action video games help to improve cognitive functions. And unfortunately, there is still few studies on board games. Most studies focused on traditional board games, but they already showed the potential of board games to improve cognitive functions, and we still need to also demonstrate this positive effect with more modern or off-the-shelf board games. So mainly, the objective of my PhD project is to examine the effect of playing like more modern, non-traditional board games on cognitive functions in adults and also teenagers. And I also want to examine this effect on academic achievement, because we know that cognitive functions is strongly related to academic learnings, academic skills. And a second objective is also to determine what are the mechanisms that could explain this relation between game practices and cognitive functions and academic skills, academic achievement. So in my PhD project, I also have some interest on board game features, because, for example, if you play like collaborative board games or more competitive board games, maybe it does not have the same impact on cognitive functioning. I also have an interest on players' experience and fun experience and how it can impact cognitive functioning and also academic learnings or learnings in general. And finally, I also have an interest on board games digitization and how it impacts cognitive functioning. So first of all, with this project, we wanted to get an overview of how playing practices in general could impact cognitive skills. To answer this question, we conducted an online study in which we recruited 496 participants, so we were really glad of this huge sample. And in this study, our participants completed a playing practice questionnaire in which we could have their game preferences, their playing time, their playing frequency. And this questionnaire was really specific to video games and board games, because we wanted to compare the already known effect of video games on cognition to the potential effect of board games on cognition. Then our participants completed 6 cognitive tests. We tested for their reasoning skills, for their mental flexibility, so the ability to shift from one kind of information to another, for their planning skills, their working memory, so it's like the short-term memory skills, and their visual spatial processing skills. To be more precise, here you can have a look of what the cognitive tests we use look like. So I often tell the participant that it's like mini games, you know, it's 5 minutes test in which you have to find a logical response, you have to reproduce a model or a sequence, so it can be kind of fun to take part in our studies. So once the data was collected, we conducted for the results what we called correlational analysis, which means that we examined the relation that could exist between our participants' playing practices and playing habits and their cognitive skills. Mainly, we find that the playtime was positively correlated, was positively related to all the cognitive measures we had. Meaning that the more you play, either video games or board games, the better are your cognitive functioning. And so we were really happy already with these results, because it also includes board games, and not only video games. And then specifically for board games, we found that the time spent playing board games is positively related to the verbal working memory skills. Verbal working memory is the short-term processing of verbal information. When you do arithmetics, when you have to maybe remember a phone number, you use your verbal working memory. And so we were really glad of this result, because it is really specific to board game. We did not find the same results with video games. And so these unique results may be explained by unique features that are specific to board games. And we think that maybe the verbal interactions that are often necessary when you play board games to set your objectives, to carry out your action, could explain this relation between board gaming and verbal cognition. And we also think that this result is important considering academic skills, because verbal working memory skills and verbal cognition in general help to memorize, to learn new information. And we think that this kind also of enhancement could help for interdisciplinary skills also, such as social skills. And indeed, some study already showed that playing board games, and especially collaborative board games, helps to develop social skills. For example, with older students, playing the game Pandemic helped them to develop their teamwork, decision-making, and organization skills, while with younger students, playing Dixit, among other games, can help children to develop their social and verbal skills and teamwork and emotion regulation skills. After playing Dixit, children are more able to initiate and maintain relationship, to adapt their behavior to the others. So here, a first conclusion I really would like to give you is that board games could really have a great potential to enhance verbal and social cognition that could really be helpful then for academic learnings and interdisciplinary skills for academic achievement. A second topic I would like to talk about today is the board games format, because I assume that in your practice sometimes you do not have access to all the board games you want. So maybe sometimes you have to use a printed version or a digitized version of a board game. So that's why I wanted to present you a second study we conducted on how board games digitization could impact cognition. In this study, we compared two Dixit versions. We use a Dixit original game, and we use Dixit World, which is a digitized version of Dixit. So here you have two screenshots of the app Dixit World, and as you can see, the way of playing is the same as Dixit. You have here your 6 cards at the bottom of the screen. You can zoom in on these cards, you can put it there. Here you have the sentence given by the storyteller, then you can vote, etc., etc. The only difference between these two games is that in Dixit World, you have to write your sentence when you are a storyteller, and in Dixit, you have to tell orally your sentence when you are the storyteller. In this study, we had 80 participants. 40 participants played to Dixit, while 40 other participants played to Dixit World. Yes, we used the Mirrors card expansion in this study because it was released at the time we conducted the study, so the participants had the same knowledge on the card. And all our participants play by groups of 4, and they played in the same room around the same table, meaning that even the participants who played to Dixit World had the possibility to interact orally. They were playing on the tablets, but around the same table, just as the participants who played to Dixit, so that we really focused on the difference between the formats, the physical and the digital formats, and we did not focus on the physical or the remote presence of the participants. And as we really wanted to get whether this kind of digitization could impact players' experience and player cognition, after the participants played whether to Dixit or to Dixit World, they completed 3 measures. We used a flow state scale. So flow state, as you may know, is a specific mental state of full immersion, concentration, and enjoyment during an activity. We also used a mental fatigue scale to get the level of mental fatigue that could be induced by the different different versions of the game. And finally, we used an attention test to get the mental load level that could be induced to the participants. Moving to the results, we compared those 3 measures between the 2 groups, Dixit and Dixit World. First of all, considering the flow state, we found that the flow level was exactly the same between the 2 groups. There was no significant difference. However, considering the mental fatigue and the percentage of errors to the attention test, we found that the scores were really low. So probably the mental fatigue and the mental load was really low in the 2 groups. However, the participants that played Dixit World reported a higher mental fatigue level and had a higher percentage of errors to the attention test, meaning that probably they had a higher mental load induced by the digitized version of Dixit. So here the conclusion is like playing a digitized version of Dixit or Dixit-like games induce the same flow state, which is really important considering concentration in learning, because probably the specific concentration state you have during flow state could last longer than the activity time, so it could be really interesting for learning also. And a little warning is only on the mental fatigue that could be induced by the digital device. So probably these results are really specific to Dixit and Dixit-like games, but probably playing digitized creative board games such as Dixit are more challenging because we use a digital device, but do not necessarily impact players' immersion. And we think that what is really important to maintain the players' positive players' experience is the group play, because I remind you that in the two groups, our participants had the ability to interact each other, to play together. And indeed, recently, studies tend to focus more on players' experience and fun experience, and it really seemed that fun could really be the key to explain the relation between games, the positive relation between games and cognition and learning. And maybe it can seem obvious, but fun is not only being happy to play, it's really being happy to play, but also being excited to play. When you are in a positive mood, but you have also a higher arousal, it can really help for cognition and learning. So here we really think these results have been shown with video games, unfortunately, and we really would like to reproduce it with board games. But we really think that using board games that will lead to fun experience could really lead to a state of enhanced cognition that could then help for learning. So maybe if you use games in class, you have to ensure that your learners are really having fun so that they can have an enhanced cognition, and then they can have better states to learn. And so finally, to conclude, if I may suggest some advice, I would say that, of course, using board games in the classroom for learners or in your institution could really help in the short term for this kind of enhanced cognition and learning, but also promote their use. Here I put at home, but it can be daily, can ensure their benefits, their cognitive benefits on the long run. Then I would also tell you to ensure that the players, the learners, really understand the activity and that it makes sense for them and that they experience it positively. And finally, of course, I would tell you to feel free to use off-the-shelf, modern, casual board games, because even though they are not created for an educational purpose, I think they can really be amazing educational tools. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I would just like to have a special thanks for my supervisors also. Thank you. And so, well, yeah, okay, so I'm leaving the stage, and now I'm giving the mic to Liam and Gray, who will talk about their studies on board games and autism. The stage is yours.
Do these ones work okay? Can I lose this one? Yeah. Okay, hi everyone. Ooh. Feedbacky. I'm Liam, this is Gray. We're both lecturers at Edge Hill University, and we're going to be talking to you today about a group of studies we've run. That's really echoey. Exploring the role of board games in the lives of autistic people, that was funded by Gaming Lab. Okay, so quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to cover 4 different studies that we ran. The first one was looking at how board games' motivations and preferences differ between autistic and non-autistic populations. The second is a qualitative study where we looked in a little bit deeper at what autistic board gamers get out of this hobby. We then did a mixed method study where we introduced autistic people who weren't already board gamers to the hobby to see what they thought of it, what they made of it. And then finally, Gray's going to be telling you about some interventions we did with schools and adult community centres where we went once a week to play games with children and adults And then finally, some of the kind of current and future work that we're doing with Dixit. No, it's fine. I'll manage. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and just a note, when we're talking about autism, we're going to be using identity-first language, so we'll be using autistic people rather than people with autism, as research has shown that that's the language people prefer. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction, talk about what autism is and what that's got to do with board gaming and why we believe these two things overlap and kind of share some space. Okay, so autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that affects about 1% of the population. Individuals with autism have social and communication differences or challenges, and typically they will also have issues with theory of mind. Theory of mind is a kind of broad umbrella term that encompasses things like taking people's perspective and reading people's minds. People with autism also have a propensity for systems, logic, and rules, and they tend to have very kind of engrossing special interests, more so than neurotypicals do. Autism also exists on a spectrum, so all of us here today will have some level of autistic traits. It's those people who have a clinical diagnosis that have the most, but we'll also be talking about a term called the BAP, or the broader autism phenotype, which is those people with a high degree of autistic traits, but not necessarily clinical levels. Okay, so why board games? As Leah's already covered really well, board games are great tools for educational purposes, communication purposes, and cognitive purposes. But we also feel board games have a kind of special overlap with theory of mind and perspective taking. So when playing any kind of game, we have to be able to read other people, take their perspective, and think about what they're doing. But that's especially the case with certain games like Dixit and Codenames, and then also a lot of social deception and bluffing games like Werewolf and Mafia and stuff. Okay, so there's also a lot of overlap between common autistic special interests and common board game themes. So some of the most common board game themes involve things like transport, trains, sci-fi, animals, etc. And these are also some of the most common autistic special interests. So this is kind of why we're thinking that these two things might be particularly aligned, autistic phenotypes and board games. Okay, so that's what we wanted to look at in this first study. We're particularly interested in what % of board gamers are autistic, and what do autistic traits look like amongst board gamers? So in this study, we did an online survey of just over 1,600 people, and we assessed both their demographics, so what that population looks like, what the population of board gamers looks like, and also why people play board games, what their motivations are, and what their preferences are within gaming. So a little bit of detail about that sample. These 1,600 people came from across a representation of countries, mostly though from the UK and USA, followed by China and then France. Mostly male sample, mostly Caucasian, and tends to be highly educated. So I think this tells us something about kind of the average board gamer or what that population looks like. We also found that most mental health conditions were in line with global averages. So amongst board gamers, things like depression, ADHD, dyslexia, etc., were all roughly what we expect to see kind of out in the general population out in the world. There was two exceptions to this though. One was anxiety, which was about prevalent at about double amongst board gamers compared to Gen Pop, and the other was autism, which we found to be about 5 to 6% amongst board gamers compared to 1% in the general population, which is particularly interesting as these are two conditions that often co-occur together. Anxiety is one of the most common comorbid conditions with autism. We also looked at autistic traits using a measure called the autism quotient, where this measures autistic traits essentially. And we found that autistic traits were significantly elevated amongst board gamers compared to Gen Pop. So people falling within that BAP range of having elevated levels of autistic traits, we expect to be around 10% in the general population. It was about 30% in our sample. So, as well as looking at the demographics of gamers, we're also interested in what motivates them to play and what their preferences are when playing. We had a huge survey and took a lot of different measures, asking what people's favorite mechanics were, what kind of themes people liked, what play lengths they liked, what play accounts they preferred, and all of this kind of stuff. And this is a really big data set that allows us to do lots of interesting things with the data. So if people wanted to design an intervention specifically for women or people with low educational needs or whatever it is, this data set allows people to do that. And we're going to be making that data set kind of open access available to people once this paper's published to look at those kinds of things. But what we were particularly interested in was how autistic and non-autistic gamers compared. So autistic gamers were quite similar to neurotypical gamers in a lot of ways, but there were some kind of interesting differences between the two. So one was that autistic people were more likely to rank themselves as mid-core or hardcore gamers than neurotypicals were. They also preferred playing alone, whereas neurotypicals rated playing in a group. Autistic players also preferred cooperative over competitive games, and they had a stronger dislike for party games. They tend to rate party games like Werewolf and things like that much lower. We also found very different motivations for gaming amongst neurotypicals and autistic individuals. Neurotypicals were rating social interaction as the most important motivation for gaming, whereas amongst autistic people, strategizing came out on top and social interaction much lower. So we next wanted to kind of have a more in-depth exploration of what autistic board gamers are getting out of this hobby. So we did follow-up interviews with 13 autistic gamers from the survey. We invited everyone who was autistic and took part in the survey who wanted to take part to do so. 13 people come forward. We interviewed them using semi-structured interviews, and then we analyzed the data using interpretive phenomenological analysis, which is a kind of emergent user-led process where you go into the data with no predispositions or hypotheses about what you expect to find and kind of let the data speak for itself. We had 2 coders code all of the data for different themes and then clustered those into this group of master themes here. So the first was about systems, and most of our autistic participants talked about how they found systems both comforting and stimulating. So these are the kind of systems that are present in games, the structure and the rules. And Gray's going to read out some quotes from the participants.
The obvious thing that comes to mind is the structure. There are rules, and you can learn all the rules, and you don't have to worry about any other weird rules that somebody else knew and you didn't get the memo about. You can safely interact in this environment without having to worry about something unexpected popping out.
So another was how games acted as a kind of social lubricant for autistic people. And this seemed particularly linked to how they found systems comforting. So individuals talked about how board games could be a kind of alternative social vehicle for them because it allowed people to kind of focus on the board game, their eyes were on the board and not each other. And Gray, do you want to give us a quote?
It's a structured environment in which to interact with other humans. We haven't got to worry as much about the whole insane social interaction thing. Interacting via the game, via the rules of the game, that's the center of attention. Eyes are on the board, not on you.
Okay, another theme that came out of our data was to do with special interests and escapism. So autistic participants talked about how board games kind of allowed them to escape themselves and their lives in the real world a little bit, and also either aligned with their special interests or ended up becoming a part of their special interests.
Board games enabled me to get out of that headspace, to escape my sort of just being myself, which is so pressurizing. And you know, it's a break, so to speak, like an island of calm.
And the final theme that we found was to do with social games and deception. So a lot of our participants talked about social deception games like Werewolf, and they kind of had mixed feelings about them. They described both enjoying them and liking the process of doing it, but also feeling like they weren't very good at it and didn't enjoy it at the same time. So Gray's going to give us 2 quotes.
So, as a negative, the deception, I wonder whether that's necessarily a skill that we need to know. I mean, I am an advocate of the truth, and something I've always struggled with is people lying. Then a positive, I do enjoy these kinds of games, but I have to feel comfortable in the setting to be able to play it. I think it would probably surprise people that I enjoy, like, interactive games, social games, party games, probably more than you might expect.
Okay, so these are the 4 themes we found from interviewing board game autistic people who are already board gamers, already playing these games. We next wanted to know what would happen if we introduced groups of autistic people who weren't already engaging with this hobby to the hobby, and see if we find similar kinds of things or not. So this is what we did in our next study. We visited 5 different autism community centres around the UK and introduced people to games like Dixit, Werewolf, Deception in Hong Kong, Codenames, etc. We spent about 2 hours with each group playing a load of different games with them, and then focus grouped them afterwards about their experiences and what they thought about these games. Using the same kind of interpretive phenomenological analysis, we found 2 themes from this data. The first was that participants felt like board games might be able to help them forge social relationships.
The board games are interesting, and we were all interested. I mean, there was no one who felt left out or didn't participate, because when you're on the spectrum, we find just making conversation, small talk, rather difficult. Couple that with, we've got a common interest together, rather than you're trying to construct chit-chat about the weather, and now you're also interacting with other people.
And the second was about how board games can build a range of different both social and cognitive skills.
New games were a challenge. When I played them, I was challenged more. So with these games, like with my autism, I've been encouraged to tolerate change more.
Okay, and the last study we're going to tell you about, which Gray's actually going to tell you about, we went to both an autistic school and an adult community centre for people with autism and played games with them once a week over a year. Over to you.
Great. Okay, next slide. Yep, so we went to a special educational school that was based in Liverpool. These were 11 children ages 10 to 14 that all had a diagnosis of autism. And we also went to a special educational center for adults that was based in Manchester. These were 14 adults with developmental disabilities, which included autism, but also other comorbid conditions, including intellectual disability. So these would be autistic adults that had, we would call, quite high functional needs. We did this over a year, and we went weekly and played an hour session with games that included Dixit, Werewolf, Spyfall, Codenames, Stella, Cash and Guns, and Werewords. After we did this for a year, we interviewed participants and staff about the experience using a semi-structured interview, and again analyzed using IPA. Okay. We found 3 themes, the first of which was about how friendships formed more naturally around the games, which was particularly surprising considering that these groups were very heterogeneous, and a lot of the friendship groups were already quite strongly established and often didn't overlap before the games were introduced. This is a quote from one of the members of staff.
I think it's made them come together a bit more. Even though they've had their arguments, they have the best. They probably have the most conversations. They've sat around the table together, and that's huge for them.
One of the themes that we also found was that there was increased independence. Practice taking turns and making choices within the games also led participants to start making choices and trusting their choices more in their everyday lives. And this is another quote. This is from a member of staff of the Adult Community Center.
We are with them all the time, and sometimes we forget that they are actually capable of doing stuff on their own. So we always sort of take over and say, like, we'll do this for you. But with the games, they've had to do it themselves, and it's been a bit of a learning curve for us to know that they're actually capable of doing it.
And finally, there were skills that were built both within the games in terms of memory, cognitive skills, but also social skills and the ability to be flexible. So this is a quote from one of the participants.
I changed, learning and adapting to the new games that I haven't played before in my life, and just to see what's going on in that game, I was learning and adapting.
Great. Okay, so in conclusion, board games provide skill building in areas related to social cognition, though they also represent challenges. So we see that these kinds of skills that have to do with mind reading, social perception, and theory of mind are things that are able to be built up through board gaming, but they are things that people still have difficulty with, and they might attribute that to their autism, but through practice they can gain confidence. And then there's aspects of board games that are already really compatible with autistic ways of being. So for instance, the strategy and the structure that's inherent to board gaming are things that autistic people can really get involved in. Board games are a social lubricant for autistic people. They reduce social anxiety and uncertainty. People can talk about the game, and this leads to discussions outside of the game. So it's a vehicle to feel safe in that environment. And finally, board games may present an important intervention for autistic adults and children. It helps build friendships and allows practice of social skills in naturally engaging settings. So quickly, I'm going to talk about some future research that we're doing, or some present research and some future ideas that we have, specifically with Dixit. So Dixit was a big hit with all of the participants that we worked with throughout these projects. It's a very flexible game because the cards are abstract and it doesn't necessarily have a lot of verbal components. It can be used with a lot of different skill levels and ages, and we actually started doing a sort of unique qualitative process with Dixit. We call it Dixit elicitation, which is based off of photo elicitation. We asked people to pick a card for the word autism, and we then asked them to describe why they chose the card that they did. So these are some examples of some of the answers. Some of them represent the challenges that are inherent to autism. Autistic people can be lonely. Autistic people can be isolated. This one of the marionette, autistic people can be manipulated. But we also saw people talking about the strengths of autism. Autistic people can be ingenious and creative, as seen with this kind of mad scientist. And autistic people think outside the box, speaking specifically about the bird that's standing on top of the maze and sort of not following the conventional rules of the maze. And that's something that we're going to be analyzing thematically and publishing as well. So some future projects using Dixit. Based off of this Dixit photo elicitation, we think that it can be used as a therapeutic intervention to understand the different ways that people talk about autism. We're going to be taking this into schools just for children with autism, schools that are mixed, that have children with and without disabilities, and then schools that are just for children that are neurotypical. And we're going to be using this Dixit elicitation to talk about disability and see how these groups compare. And then learn from that, how can we talk about disability with children? We're also going to be gamifying therapy. We're going to be working with nurture groups in the UK, which is a group of children that are particularly vulnerable. And we're going to be doing one-on-one and group counseling where we ask them to use Dixit to talk about very hard to talk about topics and see if the game makes this a more comfortable and engaging environment to do that type of work. We'd like to thank Game & Lab so much for sponsoring this project, and also our team of colleagues. And thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Leah. I'm impressed by your work. I think a lot of you are the same. It's a sample of what Gaming Lab is providing. So maybe in the future, we'll be able to show you more examples of research. So we try to communicate about it. So if you are following the Gaming Lab networks, you will have some content to see. And now I will present you Access Plus. Access Plus is an application of one of the Gaming Lab studies. The Professor Philippe Robert from the University of Nice have made a study about adapted games for Alzheimer's patients. And thanks to that studies and results, we have discussed with experts from the healthcare system to see if there is an interest or not to develop adaptive games, adaptive board games, for more adapted practices and more inclusive world for board game? And the answer was a big yes. So with Asmodee, we have decided to create a new studio named Access Plus to develop games for healthcare and for people with cognitive disabilities. So Access Plus is into the lineup of Asmodee studios, but is maybe one of the kind studios because we want to work for more inclusion, for more accessibility into board game world. Access Plus is also linked with the charity because, of course, we are selling board games, adapted board games, but it's not about margin here, it's not about business, it's about providing a tool for society. So we are in link with INAFAM, the association helping caregivers for people with mental health disabilities. So this is the DNA of our studio. And like I told you, this studio was at the beginning built of the Philippe Robert research through Gaming Lab, who showed the adapted board games have really good impact for people with cognitive disabilities from Alzheimer and diseases. Neurodegenerative diseases. The result was very important for the patient, but it was also important for the caregivers and the professional. And these two aspects give us this first spark to begin this journey to Access Plus. So Access Plus is a work of people here in the room and also to the collaboration with experts from the healthcare. So we are working with psychologists, with people who are working every day with patients, people who are using games for remediation, and we are using their knowledge and their collaboration to develop our games. So our games are for people from adults, elderly, or children with cognitive disabilities, and we want to address this game to the professional network for healthcare as well, but also for a global audience who can have people with cognitive disabilities and being able to play with them like normal people. So you will be able to find this game for psychologic or into your game shop just to make them available for a very wide audience. So our games are adaptation of the Asmodee IPs, known IPs, and we have decided to adapt Double, Timeline, and Cortex to begin with. So this is a dedicated range with specific size box, specific graphic design. So very recognizable, right? So Double have bigger cards, have different kind of level to adapt the difficulty of them. We have worked on every icon for them meaningful. We have included as well the expert advice in the rulebook and our website to ease the setting up of the game. We have identified which cognitive function are used through Double to help people who want to work on these specific features. And we have increased the quality of the card as well to be used in medical practices, for instance. And we have tested through different phases and different years the game with patients from elderly, adult, and children to be sure that all the adaptations are made for this audience. So we have done that for Double with different level of difficulty with 4 icons, 5 icons, or 6 icons to follow the capacities of the patient. And we have done the same, for instance, with Timeline. We have reduced the leverage of competitiveness into it because it's a break for the accessibility. We have selected the events to be meaningful for the patient and something specific for Timeline based on the expert feedback we had. We have created a specific personal life timeline experience. So there is a specific card when you have to place on your timeline your first memory from an injury or your first love or your first hangover or just to speak about yourself. And this provides a direct interaction between the patient and the caregivers to speak about yourself, to ease the speech. And this is also an example we have included on one role player game in every game of Access Plus range to give some autonomy between the caregivers and the players. And finally, we have adapted also Cortex to help the range to be very complementary between the three games. We have increased the card, we have worked on the challenge selection, we have worked on the graphic design as well to ease the accessibility, and all the different features are present for Double and Timeline are included in Cortex as well. So today I'm very pleased because Double, Timeline, and Cortex have been released in France, in Belgium, and soon in Canada as well. We are working on localization for a worldwide release next year, and of course we are working on different games as well. So this is a new project from Asmodee, and it shows you how our relation with the science and the research can be impactful for our industry. And to show you all these history and ambition we have with Access Plus, I have a small video to conclude this presentation.
La première fois que j'ai entendu parler d'Access Plus, d'une part, je me suis dit, est-ce qu'on va être capable de le faire? Parce que c'est vraiment quelque chose qui nécessitait un très gros travail, une très grosse découverte de ce qu'il fallait faire pour répondre aux attentes des gens à qui s'adressent les jeux. Et puis en même temps, je me suis dit, bah, si nous on le fait pas, personne d'autre le fera.
Ce qui est important pour nous et ce qui nous guide tous les jours, c'est de se dire, on se développe parce que depuis très longtemps, on s'est rendu compte que ce qui nous intéressait, c'était d'offrir un jeu à chaque joueur.
On doit montrer l'exemple, on a cette responsabilité-là de montrer que nos jeux peuvent être accessibles au plus grand nombre.
L'idée, c'était d'utiliser des jeux de société avec des patients pour les stimuler et puis aussi tout simplement jouer.
On pense que le jeu est universel, que le jeu apporte un plaisir essentiel.
Avoir un jeu en face de nous ne suffit pas à faire advenir une situation de jeu. Il faut que ce jeu soit adapté à la fois aux compétences, aux désirs, mais aussi aux besoins des joueurs.
En tant que chercheur, on est souvent très frustré. Une fois que la recherche est terminée, on plie les bagages et puis il n'y a plus rien. Alors que là, grâce à Asmodee, on va à l'étape d'après.
On va permettre à des gens qui, jusqu'à présent, bricolaient en utilisant des jeux dans des applications qui n'étaient pas pensées initialement pour ces jeux, et on va leur donner plus d'outils pour accompagner ces personnes qui ont des besoins spécifiques ou qui ont des difficultés cognitives.
Les patients que nous ciblons sont ceux que l'on trouve en IME, en ULIS, en EHPAD, en hôpitaux de jour ou en clinique.
Finalement, si on arrive à proposer un autre type de jeu qui est plus simple, où la personne peut jouer avec ses propres règles, ça lui permet aussi d'être dans de l'inventivité, dans de la créativité.
Avec le plaisir, on arrive à faire des choses, à se challenger et justement essayer de se surpasser.
La gamme Access Plus contribue à pérenniser l'universalité du jeu pour tous les publics, à tous les âges de la vie et quelle que soit leur vulnérabilité éventuelle.
On a un public passionné, on a des collègues très engagés et je pense que c'est bien de le dire, c'est bien de le penser, c'est aussi bien de le faire.
So we're arriving at the end of the presentation. So we will have a big Q&A for the whole three presentation, and just outside of the conference room, you have some table with the Access Plus range demonstration. So if you are interested, there are some people to explain you to see the project, and we are there to answering your questions. So maybe Leah, Gray, and Liam, you can come on stage to answering the question, and maybe there are some microphone for a question. Thank you.
Gibt es Fragen aus dem Publikum? I'd have one question, as a matter of fact, to the researchers from Manchester. When you were showing board games to the kids, the autistic kids, did you teach them the rules, or did they have to read the rules themselves?
We taught them the rules. We were only in the classes with the children for about an hour, so we wouldn't have really had time for them to learn the rules themselves, but we gave them a load of games afterwards, so hope is they're going to keep using them and be learning the rules for those. And if you wanted to...
Oh, they learned very, very quickly.
They did.
And they ended up really, I think, catching on immediately. And of course, because we played a lot of games that often overlap in some ways, they were able to pick them up even quicker as we introduced new ones.
They actually really quickly found a way to break a lot of the games as well. Like SPIEL, they immediately just found ways to like ask questions about what was on the cards and stuff rather than kind of what location you'd actually be in. And yeah, just really quickly broke the games.
Hello. Sorry for my English, but it's like, do you measure any difference between the, I don't know, können wir ganz kurz helfen? So den Intelligenzfaktor bei den Leuten mit Autismus, das ist ja teilweise sehr unterschiedlich. Also gibt es ja Leute, die eher funktional sind, manche Leute, die große Unterschiede haben. Wissen Sie, was ich meine? Ob da irgendwelche Auffälligkeiten waren? Oder?
Do you see any correlation between the between functional autism and intelligence, the intelligence score and patients playing board games?
We did, yeah. So the adult group who we were working with had much higher needs than the children, and we had to use very different games with them. Games like Werewolf and Spyfall and things they couldn't do as well. I think because of memory issues mostly. So yeah, we had to adapt some games. We found Dixit and Codenames much better for lower ability groups.
We also, though, I think if your question is sort of, did they improve? Did the cognition improve? We also found with those same adults, even though they had very, very high functional needs, some are non-speaking, they very much improved over time. And that's part of the quote that we showed, where the caregivers kind of could not believe how much they were able to do, and they were so surprised. And I think over time, it does show that even these groups, some were as old in their 60s, could still improve and maybe challenge some stereotypes about this population. Thank you.
Thanks for these great talks, and I really think it's great work that you're doing, and it's important. And in fact, I have a question for all speakers, but maybe let's start with one for the second part. So in study 1, you had these great data sets, the bars, and you said you will publish them anyways. But do you also have a similar plot, or like just the very same data, but where you identify for each game the autistic people and the neurotypical people, for instance? Like for each game, can you?
We do, yeah. So in the paper that's under review at the moment, there's kind of plots for mechanics for what the order of preferences are for neurotypicals and autistic gamers, same for gaming motivations and themes and everything else. Yeah, so they're all in the paper that's under review.
Yeah, we asked kind of a dizzying amount of things. We have preferred play times. We have preferred number of players in a game. We have preferred themes. So really, and that's not just for autistic people. We have that for all mental health conditions. We have that for, you can look at by gender, by age. So we really hope that people will maybe use this data set, and there's a lot more analysis that can be done.
Yeah, so rather than just kind of using the analysis that we've done and the plots that we've made and stuff, we're hoping that people can actually go in and play with the data and find out stuff we haven't found out yet, and it'll be useful for people. Yes. Don't know, it's under review. It can take 6 months to 2 years now with the process.
We're going to be using, but the data set will be available on Open Science Framework.
Yep.
And that'll be attached to our website, but please do email Liam if you would like just maybe early access.
Yeah, we can share it now. If you send me an email, we can share it straight away. We just can't publish it anywhere until the paper's published.
Thank you so much for this. It was really interesting. I was wondering if any of you have looked into people that have lost skills due to mental illness or any cognition drop, to use board games to kind of help people develop it back. Have any of you looked into it or planning on doing something with that with Asmodee games or any of you? Have you looked into that, or have you know any information about that?
I guess
very specific question, sorry about that.
Philippe would probably be the person who's done a lot of that. Do you want to talk about that? I don't know as much about Philippe's work. That's what he does, right?
Philippe Robert is using innovation, non-medical innovation, to help patients, and it has a lot of data on technology, art, and board game. He has published a recommendation for health practice using different type of these practice items, mainly art and board games. All of us have participated to that paper. So if you have more interest, we can share the article for sure.
Thank you for the presentation. I have one question. You did the research for 1 year. Do you think that your research impacted the way that currently in these centers treatment or interaction with these focus groups is it altering? I mean, have you changed anything in the treatment of these people?
Take it, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. I think so. So previously, for instance, at these adult community centers, of which there are many all over the world, many in the UK, they typically do, because there's some individuals have quite significant challenges, often they will do activities that maybe are not very challenging. Very good intentions, but they're quite simple. So for instance, very basic art projects or doing Wii games. This was the first time that they had ever had people come in and try, and it took many weeks to teach the rules of Dixit, for instance. It was not an easy task. But by the end of it, they knew how to play, and they were then able to do that independently. And it was an incredible change for the way that that center was run. We've, of course, left, thanks to Gaming Lab as well, left the games, and they continue to use these. And I think it was a very transformative experience for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Same with the school as well. The school is still using the games and doing it weekly with them, and we saw a lot of change in the children. We had some individuals who kind of, when we went there on the first day, wouldn't engage at all, weren't speaking, and eventually, like, towards the end of the year, they were starting to come over and join in, and yeah, so some big changes.
So future work, we will definitely want to pursue quite controlled studies that use more quantitative methods to track progress on not just cognitive, but social development, because we think that this is so valuable. Yes. Thank you for that question.
There are two people here as well. Maybe here.
Hi, I'm a public school teacher in Los Angeles, and I find that I have autistic or on the spectrum kids mainstreamed with my neurotypical students, and I'm wondering, is your research, did you have students in mixed groups playing these games, and how, or not, and if so, what the result was that positive or not?
Haven't done it yet. We're starting that now. That's our next project that started when we get back to the UK, so yeah, we can let you know, but we haven't done it yet.
Yes. Yes, so the school that we went to actually, and we should have said this, but it's there's probably schools like this in the US as well. Well, I know there are because I worked at one, but in the UK, almost a last stop sort of school where other schools did not work because the behavior challenges were so significant. So this was a purely, this was an all autistic group, but of course it's much more common to have mixed classrooms, and so that is definitely our next step because that's a very important part of the research too. Yeah, thank you.
I think beginning of November they start.
Yeah.
Maybe access that to Gaming Lab, like the
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll publish it.
Yeah.
Tweet about it.
Yeah. Our purpose with Gaming Lab is to provide resources to researchers to make cool projects on board games. And once they are official publication, our role as a Gaming Lab is to enhance the diffusion of that knowledge. So once the publication will be online, we will do everything we can through Gaming Lab to make it available for everyone.
Hi. Do you see the future of your research being more geared towards social and emotional needs of gamers and players? Because I'm curious, especially for the cognitive aspect, as a teacher, it's a lot easier to sell games in the classroom as a program when we're showing cognitive benefits. Obviously, everyone understands the importance of social emotional learning, but if we can show that there's cognitive benefits, that's what's going to make it a lot easier to incorporate games into what we do.
Yeah. We did also take a lot of cognitive and social measures in the year-long intervention. So we took measures of people's ability to detect lies, people's ability to tell lies, and what was the other measure? The shapes? I can never remember what they do.
Yeah, so it was like holistic processing.
Yeah, holistic processing and a load of other measures, but we just don't have a big enough sample with these sizes, like 11, to do meaningful statistical analysis with it yet. So yeah, we're hoping to beef that up.
I think as well, in some ways when you do autism research, it's a gift to be able to fully focus on the social and emotional development, because this is a condition where it's quite known that there are specific challenges related to this. And so in these special educational schools and community centers, you're sort of given rein to completely focus on that area of skill building. And we've seen some really amazing transformative changes. So maybe it's a dream that also we put that type of emphasis on all children, because we could all use specific targeted interventions on just these areas of growth as well. But the cognitive benefits of board games are also very important. Yes.
I'd have a question for Lea, because you talked about cognition and learning, and I was talking about the rules, learning rules. In what way does it affect cognition and learning the way that you learn rules? If you are watching a video, if someone explains it to you, or if you just read the text and apply the rules?
Unfortunately, I don't have a focus on how learning rules may impact cognition, but I think that's a really interesting question, because we mainly have a focus on the overall experience of playing board games and what kind of board games and what is the player's experience. But maybe the different way of learning rules, if it's someone that already know the game, or if you are only reading the rules that is in the game box, it will have a different impact on cognition. The only thing that I can say is that the overall experience from learning the room to learning the rules to play the game can have an impact on cognition, but I still don't know what the different part of playing the game from learning the rules to at the end win, for example, have this specific impact on cognition.
All right. What approach did you use when teaching the rules? Or maybe the question is, was the approach you used when teaching the rules any different than the approach you would use when teaching the games to neurotypical people?
I don't think so. So when we were working with the school, I was working with an older group of kind of 12 to 14, Ray with the younger group. And yeah, for my group, it was exactly the same as us playing with friends, to be honest. I kind of got it really quick. I don't know about you.
Yeah, there were some things that were a bit different. Autistic people sometimes have sensory differences, so sometimes they were going crazy with the pieces or the cards. We had some difficulties with emotion regulation, not about winning and losing, but about, for instance, in Dixit, which color. But I think what's so amazing about those opportunities, even though they are difficult at the time, is that games make you grow and stretch. And so when people would have difficulties with these types of things or need patience to learn the rules, it's a time to practice patience in a sense. And then with the adult group, we did have significant difficulties. That was less, I think, related to autism, more related to intellectual disability. And again, it's just adapting and seeing what works. Werewolf was out because of the memory challenges. But Dixit was a perfect game. So you learn a bit what works and what doesn't. Everyone is so different.
Just first of all, thank you all for great presentations and very interesting researches. And I have a question for Lea. When you were looking at board games and the cognition development and learning adaptability, did you find that any board games or any types of board games did not have any impact at all, or even negative impact?
We did not find negative impacts, no. In our online study, we really compared video games and board games, and we didn't make the difference between the different kind of board games that could be played, for example, collaborative board games or more like reflex board games. But the only thing that we found is that that could have a positive impact on verbal cognition or no impact on other cognitive measures we had. We think that maybe we not have an effect on the other cognitive measures because maybe video games really help to enhance attention skills that would then enhance the other measures we had. And so maybe that's why we only find this effect on verbal cognition, but we did not find negative effect. We did not find that there were skills that were lower in board gamers than in video gamers or no gamers, for example.
Are there any more questions? Take your chance, they're here for you. No more questions? There is one question.
Thank you. So this time maybe a question for Leah. So in your results, or the results you presented, they were for Dixit specifically. But in the beginning, you also mentioned other games, and now you also answered about other games. Can you reproduce those results for the Dixit also in other games, or how did you do it? Did you they measure the same things, or for the other games? I mean.
So first, with our online study, we considered all board games. So we can say if we can reproduce these results for different kind of board games. And the results we have with the Dixit study and the digitization of board games, these results are very specific to Dixit and Dixit-like board games, because maybe if you use board games in which all the moves you made are really meaningful, the results here will not be the same. For example, when you're rolling the dice, if you are doing it on a tablet in a digitized way, it will not have the same impact on players' experience and cognition. So those results are really specific to Dixit, and I did not have the chance or the time to reproduce it with other games, if it answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Yeah, and the methods could be replicated for other games, of course.
Any more questions? No? No. I don't see any hands raised. So thank you very much, Liam, Gray, Leah, Michael.